What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Blade, and we're back with another crazy reaction video. We got my boy Yapmaster with another banger. Most disturbing crimes at Starbucks. This is gonna be a long one, so make sure you got your dinner, your snacks ready. And without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe for more disturbing horror games and reactions. Now let's start it up. Chestnut audio. Okay.
These are the most disturbing crimes that happen at Starbucks, and as the video goes on, things only get worse. At around
San Jose hidden bathroom camera. Oh, brother.
11:30 a.m. on January 31st, 2024, a maintenance employee at the Coleman Avenue Starbucks in San Jose was working on the sink in the restroom when he noticed something strange. A small camera was tucked under the sink with the lens aimed directly at the toilet, barely visible unless you're looking for it. Now, the employee didn't touch it, but immediately alerted management, and within minutes, the manager called 911. Now, a few minutes later, San Jose Police Patrol officers arrived at the scene, securing the restroom and ensuring that no one else entered while they waited for specialized investigators. And because of the nature of the incident, the case was immediately transferred over to a special unit, the SAIU, and as they carefully removed the device and began pulling footage from the storage, what they found was worse than anyone expected. The camera recorded from approximately 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. the previous day, January 30th, which was 10 full hours of continuous recording. And the footage, of course, shows people washing their hands, adjusting their clothing, and unfortunately using the toilet. All of them recorded without consent and without knowledge, in what should have been a completely private space. Officer Tanya Hernandez, one of the investigators brought in to handle the case, described what they found, saying,
"This recording is graphic and includes multiple juvenile victims fully exposed."
Between January 31st
I mean, what else? Obviously, this was intentionally put there. What else do you expect to see? Perfectly aimed to see the bad genitals areas of females. And wait, did they? Is it a female's washroom or just like a male washroom?
And mid-March, detectives were actively working on identifying the person responsible. They reviewed the Starbucks surveillance footage from January 30th, looking for anyone who used the restroom during the recording window. They also talked to staff members, asking about suspicious behavior or anyone who spent an unusual amount of time in the bathroom. They also traced the serial number, purchase history, and identified the storage type to narrow down the suspect pool. They also cross-referenced people who were at the Starbucks that day with databases of known offenders, looking for patterns and connections. And a few days later, the detectives were actually able to trace the act back to one person, a 35-year-old San Jose resident named Luis Juarez Jr. Now, how exactly they identified Luis was never publicly disclosed, but 6 weeks after the camera was found, they had their man. It turns out that on January 30th, 2024, Luis had walked into a Starbucks on Coleman Avenue and entered the restroom and installed a hidden camera under the sink, pointed directly at the toilet. And in a single 10-hour window, 91 people used the bathroom without knowing that they were being recorded. The youngest was, well, the oldest was 85.
That's cheese pizza. He has cheese pizza. That's recorded cheese pizza now. Well, he's going to jail.
Police finally tracked down Louis and searched his home. They found something that made investigators realize that this wasn't just an isolated incident. A tactical unit specialized in high-risk crime traced Louis to his San Jose home. And while executing the search warrant, they found approximately 20 firearms scattered throughout his home, including an assault rifle, an unregistered weapon, and high-capacity magazines. Now, this would complicate the case even more, since Louis was a convicted felon with a criminal history that should have prevented him from owning any firearms at all, let alone an arsenal like this. But investigators weren't actually looking at the guns. They were looking at the cameras.
They also seized 20 firearms, including an assault rifle, and they say they found several micro cameras. One was hidden inside this tiny toy soccer ball.
There were multiple micro cameras, the kind specifically designed to be hidden in everyday objects and spaces, small enough to conceal almost anywhere, and advanced enough to record high-quality video without being detected. The discovery of those additional cameras confirmed what investigators feared from the moment they found the device at the Starbucks. This wasn't a one-time incident. Louis had been doing this for quite a while. Now, detectives immediately began investigating whether there were other victims in other locations, while Louis was booked into the Santa Clara County main jail on March 15th and charged with possession of explicit content involving
Hey, that's my birthday.
young people, installment of a hidden surveillance camera with audio, possession of high-capacity magazines, possession of an assault rifle, and possession of an unregistered firearm. And 5 days later, on March 20th, the San Jose Police Department made the case public. They released a statement identifying Louis, outlining the charges, and asking potential victims to come forward. Now, upon learning about the news of Louis' arrest, parents whose children used the bathroom felt sick, and regular customers who stopped in for coffee and used the restroom were horrified, and community members reacted with horror and anger when local news stations interviewed them. One of them, named Alex, said this:
It is a feeling of being violated, and this is wrong. You know, I'm glad they caught the person, and I hope the hammer comes down hard on them.
Another resident named Marta Gonzalez was visibly shaken when she spoke to the reporters covering the incident. She explained that she and her kids used the restroom frequently, as they were regulars at its Starbucks, and now she has to wonder if her children were among the 91 victims in that footage.
That is just horrible. Like, this is like a community, like everybody comes here, you know, and just to have people looking at you, that's insane.
Now, Starbucks corporate released a statement calling the incident deeply disturbing, and they emphasized their full cooperation with law enforcement and their commitment to customer safety. However, for the 91 victims, corporate statements don't really answer the questions that matter. Now, and the case remains open as investigators continue working, trying to identify all the victims, and also analyzing the additional cameras found in Louis's home to determine if other locations were targeted, all while building the prosecution's case to ensure that Louis faces the maximum possible consequences. And while this offender operated in secret, this next case unfolded in broad daylight, inside a Starbucks sitting directly across the street from a police station. Dominique M.
Of course it's in Ohio. Ohio Starbucks armed robbery.
Hollom was 30 years old when he walked into a North Olmsted, Ohio Starbucks on a Monday morning, pointed a gun at everyone inside, and demanded cash from the registers. What made his decision even more baffling was the location he chose. The Starbucks sat directly across the street from police headquarters.
Yep, this guy is real smart. Robber. He really thought this one through.
And within minutes, officers arrived, and what started as a simple robbery turned into a foot chase, 2 gunfight exchanges, a vehicle pursuit, and a 15 to 20 minute armed standoff. It all started on March 21st, 2022, around 8 AM. The Starbucks in North Olmsted, Ohio was busy with the Monday morning rush. Customers ordering coffee before work, employees behind the counter managing the flow. It was the usual early morning routine. Then Dominique walked through the door with a gun in his hand and ordered everyone to the ground. Now the customers dropped immediately, some crouching behind tables and others flat on the floor, while Dominique approaches the counter and tells the employees to empty the register. Now someone actually manages to call 911, and within minutes the police officers arrived to the scene. But as soon as Dominique heard the sirens, he grabbed the bags of cash and ran out the front door. Now this is when the foot chase began. Officers pursued him on foot as he sprinted down Lorraine Road carrying the bags, but the weight just slowed him down, and so as he ran, the bills actually started falling out, scattering across the pavement, and he eventually dropped everything, with the cash register falling onto the street. Now near Dover Center Road and the Brook Park extension, one officer was actually driving slowly, scanning the area, and when he spotted Dominique running past a driveway at Dover Center Road, the officer pulled into the sidewalk and struck Dominique from behind with the front of the cruiser.
Bonk.
Now Dominique stumbled forward from the impact, but didn't actually go down. Then he turned back toward the cruiser, raised his gun, and fired 2 shots directly at the windshield.
Oh man, this guy's life is in danger.
And moments later, the officers were engaged in a firefight with Dominique. Now one officer sustained minor injuries during the exchange, while Dominique managed to take off running again, leaving more cash scattered behind him. Eventually he reached a vehicle parked nearby, got inside, and began speeding off northbound on Dover Center Road. And the officers immediately pursued him through the residential street. Now this pursuit ended when Dominique's vehicle stopped behind a home on Kingston Circle, and the officers surrounded the area. And a few minutes later, another exchange of gunfire erupted, and then just a minutes later after that, it stopped. Thankfully, the negotiators were actually able to convince Dominique to surrender before anyone lost their lives. And once they exited the vehicle with his hands up, the officers immediately moved in to place him in custody. And that was when they actually discovered that he'd been hit during one of the gunfire exchanges. And so to save his life, paramedics transported him to a hospital for treatment while under police guard. Now the next day, the police decided to release dashcam footage showing the moment the cruiser struck him and the moment he turned and fired at the officer inside. And the video shows 2 bullet holes punched directly through the
Dang.
windshield, inches from where the officer was sitting. The authorities also identified Officer Chris Kelly as the officer Dominique shot at during the chase. Luckily for him, Chris walked away with minor injuries. And 9 days later, on March 31st, a grand jury handed down an indictment against Dominique with an extensive list of charges. The indictment covered everything from the robbery itself to the 2 gunfight exchanges: attempted murder, assault on a peace officer, aggravated robbery, weapons charges, and drug possession. And so 8 months later, on November 30th, 2022, Dominique pleaded guilty to every single count. 5 days after that, on December 5th, Judge Shannon Gallagher sentenced him to 18 to 20 years in prison, while the cash he stole was scattered across Dover Center Road and recovered by police. But while Dominique's crime involved a split-second decision to rob a Starbucks and flee from the police, the next case unfolded on a crowded downtown sidewalk, and this time, dozens of people watched it happen.
37-year-old was at the coffee shop with his wife and daughter at about 5:30 Sunday when he was stabbed following what police have called a brief altercation with another man.
You gotta be kidding me. Vaping? Oh my goodness. This was all over vaping?
On March 26, 2023, just before 5:40 p.m., the sidewalk outside the Starbucks at West Pender Street and Greenville Street in downtown Vancouver was packed with people. Families, tourists, and shoppers. Everyone was moving through the Sunday evening crowd. And 37-year-old Paul Stanley Schmidt was there with his fiancée and their 3-year-old daughter Erica, pushing a stroller. And at the same time, another 32-year-old man named Inderdeep Singh Gozal was there.
Oh my, I don't even want to get... Yo, I could say the most fried. I live in Canada. I'm in Toronto. I'm not these people, okay? I want to make that clear. I am not associated. I'm Tamil. I'm completely different from these guys, okay? Guys are from India. I'm from Sri Lanka. Tamil. We're different. Do not associate us with them. I don't know why they brought a lot of them into our country. But they have caused a lot of problems. So this is not surprising. And second of all, this guy's 32 and he's vaping. Like, be for real, dog. Be for real. You do not need to be vaping at 32.
Near the entrance, vaping. And when Paul approached and asked him not to vape in front of his daughter, Inderdeep didn't take it well. And before anyone could understand what was going on, 2 men had started grappling on the sidewalk. Now Paul pushed back, trying to defend himself, when suddenly Inderdeep pulled a folding knife and stabbed him 6 times as they struggled. And his fiancée began screaming in horror as she watched her partner crumble to the ground. But instead of helping, bystanders simply pulled out their phones and started recording. One of the
We are cooked as a society. Dude, the bystander effect will never die, bro. In this day and age, anything, any altercation, the second someone witnesses, they don't help, they immediately, bam. That's when you really think about it. But there's 2 sides to this type of situation. Because at the end, he does have a weapon on him. So you don't want to, unless you have help. If there's that's the other thing. There probably was multiple people. If multiple people could have just like pushed him down, so he's, you know, he drops the knife, then hold him down, and then one person calls the police. Boom. You save the day. But if everyone is just like this, then we're just cooked as a society, bro. You're just gonna leave that guy to die while his wife and kid is there witnessing the whole thing. Obviously, someone called 911, but did that guy run away or escape? Let's find out.
Most people recording was Alex Bodger, an influencer whose video captures Paul's final moments on the ground, bleeding out on the pavement. And you can hear Paul's partner crying in the background and Alex saying,
"This guy just stabbed him, bro. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead, bro."
Now Vancouver police officers patrolling nearby were flagged down by people in the crowd, and they immediately arrested Innerdeep at the scene and began performing first aid on Paul. Now paramedics then rushed him to the hospital, but later that evening, Paul unfortunately died from his injuries. And the same night, Alex Bodger uploaded the video on TikTok. And
what are you doing? Bro, you can't put that on TikTok.
within hours, it spread on Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter. Now the next day, on March 27th, Vancouver police publicly on Instagram.
I need to see these comments. No one helped. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. No one helped.
And Twitter.
That's another thing. Yeah, this guy, what this guy said is 100% true. In this day and age, even if you just look at someone and you're like, yo, stop vaping in front of the store. My daughter's here. That guy could just be like this. You just pull it out like that, bro. Some people, that's what I'm saying, bro. You can't think everyone is nice. Because you literally could just die by just beefing with the wrong person. That's why you just do your own thing. You just go into the store, get yourself, leave. Do not care about what someone is yapping or saying. If they're smoking in front of the store, whatever, man. You just rush in the store so you don't inhale it. And then get your stuff, leave. Don't be like, hey, don't do that. This is what happens. Man just pulls out a knife and stabs you for just being like, hey, don't vape in front of the store. And he's like, what did you say to me? Bam. Your life is gone. It's crazy, crazy world we live in. That, you know, common courtesies, things people get offended by.
Now the next day, on March 27th, Vancouver police publicly identified both the victim and of course the perpetrator. And so Innerdeep was later charged with second-degree murder. He denied bail and was held at the North Fraser Pre-Trial Center. Now a day later, Paul's mother, Kathy Schmidt, would speak to the media expressing her grief about her son's death.
People chose to videotape it and stand by and watch. That's the most difficult thing.
Now she was devastated, not just by her son's death, but by what happened after. She told the reporter that she'd seen her son's final moments captured and shared for the world to consume, and she pleaded with people to take it down and to
that might be the most like messed up way in this generation of you're the mother and like one day you're just on TikTok and you're scrolling and then you see your own son on the floor, unalived. That might be the most messed up way to get the news of your own child. Imagine that. That's actually fried. That's so messed up.
Respect their family's privacy and to let them grieve without having to see Paul's death replayed over and over again online.
Please take the video down. Please don't watch it. It's horrific. It's brutal.
I don't even know how that got on TikTok. Bro, I make a TikTok on a game and I put the word gambling and like the second it uploads, it gets taken down. But this is allowed. I make a TikTok, I'm playing a game and I use the word gambling in the game, in the TikTok caption, instantly taken down. But this is on TikTok. TikTok, no time. These social media platforms are, their TOS is not good. Very bad.
It's hurtful. Just stop posting it. Stop looking at it. Let us be in peace.
Now But in response, Alex Bodger simply defended his decision to post the video.
I find street fights pretty cool, so I ran.
Yo, punch this guy in the face, bro. He literally. This is not a street fight. This is literally a murder. This is not a street fight. This is a murder.
To take a video, not really understanding the full grasp of what was happening. I continued to videotape. It really didn't register until the next morning, and so
this guy's so dumb. This guy's actually, what do you mean it didn't you videotaped that guy getting stabbed and you're saying it didn't register until the next day? Can I punch this guy in the face? You know, he has a punchable face, bro. We need to box him up and record him getting boxed up. You recorded, and you're saying it took you the next day to realize, oh my god, I recorded a guy getting killed. Shut the f. I'm gonna punch this guy in the face.
in the moment it was like, holy crap, I just witnessed this. I didn't fully understand what I just witnessed. And the next morning I woke up, the screams are playing through my head. It is not doing anybody good anymore. At first it was, you know, it blew up. Everybody knows what's going on now.
Now, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim labeled the incident both awful and tragic, emphasizing that no one should ever feel unsafe walking around the city. And to help Paul's family cope with the loss, a GoFundMe was set through the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Garden Society of Vancouver that ended up racking up almost $200,000. Now, for nearly 3 years, the case moved through pre-trial proceedings under a publication ban. And on February 10, 2026, when Innerdeep's second-degree murder trial finally took place in the British Columbia Supreme Court, Innerdeep actually decided to plead not guilty. But the
Yo, get this guy deported, dog. Oh my god, get this guy deported.
eyewitness report and the evidence against him was too overwhelming, as police had found a closing folding knife on Innerdeep when they arrested him, and lab tests confirmed that Paul's blood was on the blade.
Inderjeet Singh Gossal is facing a charge of second-degree murder in the death of Paul Stanley Schmidt.
Now, as of now, the case still actually remains in court, so a decision still has yet to be made. But while bystanders stood frozen in shock during this attack, the next case happened after midnight in an empty parking lot with no witness and no one around to help.
It happened in an instant. Authorities say 53-year-old homeless woman Griselda Joseph was walking near the Starbucks in Millbrae when she was hit at high speed by a BMW SUV early Monday morning.
On September 20th, 2021, around 12:20 a.m., a San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy was conducting a routine business check in Millbrae when he pulled into a Starbucks parking lot. His headlights would sweep across the pavement, and that's when he would see something strange in the distance. A woman was lying face down on the asphalt, completely unresponsive. Now, the deputy called for an ambulance immediately as he approached to check for signs of life, but she was barely breathing and her entire body was covered with severe injuries. Now, within a matter of minutes, paramedics arrived and transported her into the San Francisco General Hospital, and upon arrival, doctors began treating her for what they described as multiple organ injuries consistent with being run over repeatedly. Now, the next day, on September 21st, investigators identified the victim as Griselda Joseph, a 53-year-old homeless woman who frequented the area. She was kind of known to spend time in the Starbucks parking lot and regularly visited the Safeway supermarket across the street.
She's homeless, but she has a car? She lives in her car?
From the same store. Now, to get to the root of the matter, detectives immediately began reviewing surveillance footage from the nearby businesses. Now, they didn't release the video to the public, but what they saw told a horrifying story. That fateful night, the CCTV captured a gray BMW SUV accelerating towards Griselda as she walked on the sidewalk. Now, the car struck her and sent her belongings flying.
Oh no, Griselda is the homeless woman that got ran over. My bad.
And then it ran her over again and again. Now, the same morning, a deputy searching the area spotted a gray BMW SUV parked in front of a residence on Henry Place, less than half a mile from the Starbucks. The car had damage consistent with a recent collision, and so the detectives contacted the owner on the spot, whose name was Garrett Young. He was 23 and lived at the same residence where the vehicle was found. And because that seemed kind of suspicious, they did an interview, and during it, the detectives pieced together the connection between Garrett and Griselda. It turns out that Garrett worked at the Safeway supermarket directly across across from the Starbucks, and his job duties included cleaning the store and collecting shopping carts. Now, Griselda regularly came into the market, and over several months, she'd repeatedly yell at Garrett. She actually complained that the bathrooms weren't clean to her liking, and criticized his work in front of other customers and employees. She was, by multiple accounts, consistently kind of mean to him, and so over time, the repeated yelling from Griselda built up an insane level of resentment in Garrett. He couldn't handle the constant criticism and complaints, and so just after midnight on September 20th, he decided to do something about it. He got into his BMW, drove to the Starbucks parking lot where he knew that Griselda spent time, found her, and ran her over. Then he drove home where he lived with his parents, parked his car in front of his house, and went inside as if nothing had happened. Now, detectives of course immediately placed Garrett under arrest and booked him into the McGuire Correctional Facility on an attempted murder charge. Almost immediately, Garrett's defense attorney raised concerns about his competency to stand trial because Garrett actually has documented developmental disability.
KTVU legal analyst Michael Cardoza says the fact that the defendant may be disabled won't absolve him of liability in this case.
There are plenty of people with mental defects that are law-abiding citizens, so that will not be an excuse.
And so the court actually suspended the criminal proceedings to actually do a competency evaluation and brought in 2 independent doctors to assess Garrett's mental state to determine whether he was fit to stand trial.
Now today, in fact, a judge suspended criminal proceedings after the defense questioned their client's mental competency. That means he will now be evaluated by 2 doctors. Now meanwhile, the victim's prognosis is grim. If she dies, this will likely turn into a murder investigation. Now the defendant still is being held without bail.
Now 2 weeks after the attack, Griselda actually died from her injuries. She'd been fighting for 16 days, but the trauma from being run over multiple times was simply too severe. And her death actually changed everything, as the charge against Garrett was now upgraded from attempted murder to simply murder. And so on December 15, 2021, the competency evaluation results came back, and both independent doctors reached the same conclusion. Garrett was not competent to stand trial due to his disability. Now the media coverage of the incident pretty much died after that, so it's not really clear whether Garrett ever got sentenced, but we can pretty much assume that he got away with it. And while Garrett's case have more questions than
Bro, that's crazy, bro. All you had to say to her is she's homeless, bro. You just roast her back. You didn't have to do all... The fact that this guy got away is actually insane, bro. At 23 years old, too. That's crazy. All you had to do was just roast her. If you knew she was homeless, why would you even... Or you just tell her, yo, you can't even afford a toilet. Broke ass. Just roast her, bro. She's homeless. You just keep roasting her back. Yo, she roasting you. Back, yo, that's crazy, bro. Go back to the Starbucks parking lot, bro. That's your house, bro. Imagine sleeping on concrete. You just gotta roast her back, bro. If she pissing you off, you be like, yo, why are you talking when you homeless, dog? I'm doing my job, bro. I got money, bro. You sleeping on this concrete floor every night. Why are you telling me how to do my job, man? And you get a job. But this man took it to the neck. He was like, I'm done. I'm done dealing with this damn homeless lady every shift. You know, it's crazy. And he got away with this guy's insanity, bro.
Answers, this next case started with something even more ordinary than a dirty bathroom complaint, a credit card that got declined and ended in tragedy.
Officers responded to a very confusing event that involved shooting inside the Starbucks.
Pedro Jose Garcia was a 34-year-old man with a rap sheet stretching back to 2001, which includes charges of stolen vehicles, felony assault, burglary, drug stealing, and weapons possession.
And you just keep letting him out in the public instead of just keeping him locked up. He has this much of a resume, but you keep him released.
He'd been in and out of prison for over a decade. It's September 25th, 2016. The Starbucks at 7260 South Rainbow Boulevard in Las Vegas was filled with weekend customers when Pedro pulled up to the drive-thru window and handed over his card to pay for his drink. Now the employee ran it twice, but both attempts came back declined. And when the employee asked if he had another way to pay, Pedro's demeanor shifted almost immediately, and he began to argue with the employee through the drive-thru window. Customers waiting behind him started to notice the delay as the tension built, but the employee actually kept her composure, calmly explaining that she she cannot hand over the drink without the payment. But Pedro's voice only grew loud, and eventually he pulled away from the window. But instead of leaving, he drove around to the back of the Bank of America next door, parked out of sight, and walked back into the Starbucks to confront the employee.
So police tell us that it starts at this drive-through window. The suspect trying to pay for a drink, but his credit card was denied.
A 41-year-old man named Alexander Kutshivili was present at the scene, and as he saw the argument escalating, he decided to defuse the situation. Now the customers began edging away, instinctively sensing the danger, and at that moment, Pedro pulled out a gun. Now instantly, panic erupted as people dropped to the floor and scrambled behind chairs and tables, while the employees ducked behind the counter. He fired into the ceiling, shouting and waving the weapon. Now Alexander was still standing, still believing he could talk Pedro down, but it unfortunately didn't turn out as he planned. Pedro said,
"Go for it, dog. I'm not gonna tell you again. Play cowboy with me, dog."
Then Pedro would aim the gun directly at Alexander's chest and fire. Now he would collapse, with blood spreading across the floor. And so at 11:26 a.m., multiple 911 calls flooded into dispatch, and police were sent to the Starbucks immediately, treating it as a possible hostage situation. But while officers were racing to the scene, Pedro made another call to 911 himself. He gave a fake description of the shooter, lying about what
No way. This guy's doing some 300 IQ play.
the suspect looked like, what they're wearing, and where they went. He was trying to misdirect investigators, sending them looking for someone who doesn't actually exist, while he blends in with the victims. And so when the officers arrived, they evacuated everyone outside. And as customers and employees filed out, Pedro simply walked out with them, pretending to be just another terrified witness. And for a while, the officers couldn't actually identify who was behind the shooting, due to the conflicting.
No one snitched? You gotta be stupid. You gotta be stupid. None of the hostages snitched. They know who the freaking killer is, and none of them. What kind of? One person literally could have just secretly went beside the officer and just whispered, "This dude, that's the guy who killed. He's acting like he's not the killer." No one said anything.
Stories. But as officers actually interviewed people at the scene, their stories didn't match with the 911 call Pedro made. And after matching the stories and tracing the suspected call, they managed to identify Pedro in the evacuated group and took him into custody. Now inside the Starbucks, paramedics were working on Alexander, performing CPR and trying desperately to save him. They then transported him to the Spring Valley Hospital Medical Center. But unfortunately, at 12:49 p.m., less than 2 hours after the gun attack, Alexander was pronounced dead.
Metro says.
See, this is why if he has a gun and you don't have a gun, it's GG, man. You cannot pull a Naruto, talk no jutsu, and talk his way out of killing. Okay, that doesn't work in real life. Okay, can I give someone some heartfelt speech, trying to diffuse, and expect him to be like, you know what, you're right. I'm gonna put this gun away and go about my day. You're right. I'm gonna leave this store now. You guys have a good day. That's not how it works. He has the gun. He's mentally unstable. And you going like, don't do it, man. It's not worth anything. What'd you say to me? Bang, bang. Now you're just dead. That's what I'm saying. If they have a weapon, you just gotta hide and do whatever they say, because your life matters a lot. Do not be the hero and try to talk your way through it, because at the end of the day, you're getting blasted either way. There's like a 1% chance that you can talk them out of it.
It started after an argument escalated between two men. The suspect shot the other man in the chest. Witnesses inside that Starbucks tried to save that man. As they attempted CPR, he died later at a local hospital. Meanwhile, parents waited. Thankfully for Kim Plank, she received a call early, relieved her 20-year-old daughter was safe.
So my daughter called, and she works the drive-thru at Starbucks, and she said guy came in with a gun, she got down, and then when she had a second, she jumped out the window. of the drive-thru.
Now, after police took him into custody, Pedro actually told them that there was a bomb in the backpack he'd left inside the Starbucks, and the bag was kept at the doorway while he'd walked out and blended into the crowd. And so federal agents were called in and a bomb squad arrived. Nearby businesses were told to evacuate from the crime scene, and people were moved to shelter-in-place positions while bomb technicians deployed a robot to examine the backpack.
A potential bomb threat that has since been cleared in an alleged hostage situation. Police say calls came in about this being a hostage situation because of the way customers and employees were describing it to 911.
But of course, when the bomb squad eventually opened the bag using the robot, they of course didn't find any explosive device inside. So at 2:13 p.m., more than 3 hours after the gun attack, the scene was declared safe. And the next day, September 26th, Pedro Jose Garcia was booked on a lengthy list of charges, which includes open murder with a deadly weapon, robbery with a deadly weapon, burglary while possessing a weapon, and discharging a gun at an occupied structure. However,
you know, it's crazy. This all could have been avoided if you just kept his ass in jail. Man's kept giving this guy leniency. And now look. Now look.
Because of his criminal history, he was also charged with possession of a gun by a prohibited person. Now, it nearly took 2 years after the gun attack, on August 2nd, 2018, that Pedro was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 14 years.
No! Just keep him in prison, bruh.
We're learning Cucciavilli, who friends called Sasha, was a regular at this Starbucks. Police reports now showing why investigators say Pedro Garcia shot him. Police say Garcia called them during the shooting. He told police Cucciavilli appeared to be reaching for something. On the phone, police can hear a man moaning in the background. As Garcia shouts, "Go for it. I'm not going to tell you again. Play cowboy with."
He was sent to Southern Desert Correctional Center to begin serving a sentence, but his time in prison was actually way shorter than anyone expected. On January 15, 2023, Pedro actually died, and the coroner ruled it as an accidental methamphetamine intoxication. Now, how he obtained the drugs inside
I was literally about to say, how the hell? Okay.
the facility was never publicly disclosed, but the Southern Desert Correctional Center did have a documented drug smuggling problem at the time.
Trash center, bro.
So we can kind of connect the dots. But while Pedro's violence erupted inside the Starbucks for everyone to see, the next case started with someone who simply didn't show up for their shift, and by the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already too late.
We begin with breaking news, a sad end to the search for a missing woman, Whitney Heichel. Investigators have found her body, and they did make an arrest tonight in her death.
Right, that never should have happened. Oh, snap.
Whitney Heichel was just 21 years old, working as a barista at a Starbucks in Gresham, Oregon. She'd recently married her husband, Clint Heichel, and the two
Damn, bro. Married at 21.
were living together in an apartment in the Rockwood area.
Hold on, how old is this guy? I'm looking a bit too old.
They were actors of the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall in Gresham, where friends described Whitney as warm, dependable, and deeply committed to her faith. She was in the first year of marriage, working early morning shifts and settling into adult life with the man she just promised forever to. But everything was about to change, because on October 16, 2012, at 6:45 a.m., Whitney left her apartment to drive to her 7 a.m. shift at Starbucks. It was a routine morning drive that should have taken less than 10 minutes, one she'd made countless times. But unfortunately, she never actually arrived at work. At around 7 a.m., her shift started without her. Her boss waited, assuming she was running late. But as the minutes passed and Whitney still hadn't shown up or called, concerns started building. And about an hour later, her boss called Clint, Whitney's husband, to ask if he knew where Whitney was. But Clint was immediately alarmed because he'd seen her leave the house for work. So he tried calling her phone, but there was no answer. He then sent texts, but still got nothing back. And so finally, at 9:56 a.m., an hour and 40 minutes after her boss first checked in, Clint decided to call 911 to report Whitney missing. And detectives began working immediately, checking surveillance footage and trying to trace her movements from the moment she left home. At 12:30 p.m., they then got their first significant lead. Whitney's ATM card had been used at 2 different gas stations in the Troutdale area, within 8 minutes of each other. Someone was using her card, and now the question was whether it was Whitney or someone else. Now 30 minutes later, the police then found Whitney's black Ford Explorer SUV in the Wood Village Walmart parking lot. The front passenger side window was smashed, and the vehicle was empty. Some of Whitney's personal items were then recovered from a trash bin near the Walmart. Though the police didn't specify what those items were. Now, the discovery of a vehicle confirmed everyone's fear. Whitney had been taken by somebody. And so the next day, the police started spreading pictures of her across local news. And they also put together a search party as volunteers combed areas near where her SUV was found, including Dodge Park and Larch Mountain. Now, investigators had previously noticed mud under the tires and believed that whoever drove it had taken it through those areas. Now, the same day, investigators flagged a 24-year-old man down named Jonathan Holt. He was a person of interest. He lived in Whitney's apartment complex and attended the same congregation. And when they finally tracked him down on October 19, he agreed to sit for an interview. And during the interview, Jonathan told the detectives that he'd actually been mugged by 2 men the previous day. He described the incident in detail, explaining how it happened, what the men looked like, and what they took. But the detectives immediately noticed inconsistencies in his story. The details simply didn't add up, and his timeline shifted when he was questioned again. The story simply felt rehearsed, but poorly executed, like someone trying to create an alibi without thinking it through. And because of those inconsistencies, detectives asked Jonathan to submit to fingerprint and DNA analysis, and he actually agreed, likely believing it would clear him and make his mugging story more credible.
And they say Holt's interviews with detectives didn't add up.
During this time, we obtained DNA and fingerprints from Holt.
Now on October 18, at around 5:30 p.m, 2 children actually found Whitney's cell phone in the bushes near the Troutdale Terrace apartments area, and the mother of one of those girls, April Fletcher, picked it up and saw Whitney's face on the screensaver. She recognized her from the missing person coverage and immediately reported it to the police, but everything came to a halt on the night of October 19, when the authorities found Whitney's body on Larch Mountain, about a 40-minute drive from her home in Gresham. Now around the same time, the DNA analysis Jonathan Holt agreed to came back, and his fingerprints and DNA matched the ones the officers found inside Whitney's SUV.
This is what Whitney Heichel's family and the entire community had feared most, and police say the man who murdered Whitney was not a stranger. He lived in her apartment complex.
And so he was
targeted attack.
Was taken into custody for investigation of aggravated murder. 3 days later, on October 22nd, prosecutors then filed major charges against Jonathan, 7 counts in total, including kidnapping, robbery, intimate violence, and murder. Because after conducting an autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Whitney's cause of death were multiple gunshot wounds. And so all these charges directly reflected what Jonathan confessed to doing before he shot her. And the next day, on October 23rd, a court document laid out the sequence of events based on Jonathan's eventual confession.
We just got this minutes ago from the sheriff's office, and the probable cause summary from the sheriff's office says Jonathan Holt admitted under questioning to a state police sergeant on Friday details of Whitney's murder and that he assaulted her.
Apparently, Jonathan had waited outside Whitney's apartment the morning of October 16. When she came out to leave for work, he approached her and asked for a ride. And Whitney, trusting him as a neighbor and fellow congregation member, said yes. Now, about 5 minutes into the drive, Jonathan decided to pull out a handgun and forced Whitney to drive to Roseland Lake, a remote area where he knew they'd be alone. Then he forced her to perform an intimate act and then shot her 4 times. Now, after killing her, Jonathan threw his phone into Roseland Lake, trying to eliminate evidence that would place him at the scene. He then moved Whitney's body to Larch Mountain, choosing an even more isolated location where he believed she wouldn't be found. He then drove her SUV to the Walmart parking lot and smashed the passenger window to make it look like a carjack. He used her ATM card at the gas station to further muddy the timeline, and then went home and simply waited. And when the police started investigating, Jonathan inserted himself into the case, volunteering to give information and telling the mugging story to explain any evidence that might tie him to, but his dies of course collapsed after the DNA evidence sealed his fate. And so on July 8, 2013, Jonathan pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and the plea counts included 3 counts of
good. Now there goes your whole life. 24, right? Shake my head.
aggravated murder, 1 count of first-degree kidnapping, and 2 counts of first-degree robbery.
I'm sorry, but at the same time, I know that that doesn't mean anything. I accept full responsibility for what I did.
Bro, if I was the husband, was that video? The video of the guy who freaking jumps at the judge, bro. That's what I would have done. Yeah, I would have. Bro, the second this guy would have started crying and saying, "I'm sorry," I would have jumped out. I would have boxed him up. Get a nice sucker punch in there.
And whatever punishment is given to me because of my.
Is that hot water? Yo, hold on. Let's go back for a second.
And whatever punishment.
I'm dumping that in his. I'm freaking just right in his face. That's not even enough. Both of those, I'm dumping it on his face, burning him for life.
Is given to me because of my selfishness I've stolen a daughter, a sister, and a wife.
Now, Whitney's family expressed relief that Jonathan pleaded guilty, sparing them a trial where they'd have to hear every detail and see every piece of evidence and pretty much relive the trauma over and over again. And while Jonathan's case stretched across 3 days of searching and unanswered questions, the next case involves a killer who vanished before the police
Yo, what the hell? Was in Japan? Japan Starbucks?
even arrived.
今日午後、四国中央市の商業施設で男性が拳銃のようなもので撃たれ、その後死亡しました。
Shiko? I can't even say that. Shikokucho? Whoa? Okay, anyways, Japan's Starbucks
It's 4
shooting.
p.m. on January 14th, 2024. The Starbucks Coffee Ion Town Kawanoya store in Shigokocho, Ehime Prefecture is open for business on a
he
Sunday
can say
afternoon. Families were inside ordering drinks, and the outdoor terrace seating area was occupied by customers enjoying the mild weather. Now, Yuichiro Ishikawa is a 49-year-old high-ranking member of the Ikeda-gumi, a designated organized crime group in Japan.
Gang member?
And he's sitting outside at one of the terrace tables. The man that approached him fired directly into Ishikawa's chest at close range, and customers inside the Starbucks heard the gunfire, and the
Wait, what?
Japan, and he's sitting outside at one of the terrace tables. The man that approached him fired directly into Ishikawa's chest at close range, and customers inside the Starbucks heard the gunfire, and the staff immediately called emergency services. Now, immediately the man left the scene before the police or anyone could actually stop him, and a few minutes later, officers arrived only to find Ishikawa bleeding heavily from his chest, and while the paramedics transported him to a hospital in an attempt to save his life, his injuries were simply too severe. The next day, January 15th, the police announced that Ishikawa had died from blood loss. And so now the focus was who was behind this attack, and what was the reason for it. And so investigators reviewed the Starbucks CCTV footage, and they found video evidence showing the man pretty clearly. They captured his face, his clothing, and his movement during the gun attack, and they were able to almost immediately identify the person. It was a man named Yushiro Matani, and so the police obtained a warrant and publicly named him as the murder suspect, and they also issued a nationwide wanted notice warning the public that Matani may still be armed and dangerous.
今日午後、四国中央市の商業施設で男性が拳銃のようなもので撃たれ、その後死亡しました。男性を撃った男は現在も逃走中で、警察は殺人事件として行方を追っています。
Now, the description released to the public includes specific identifying details, his clothing at the time of the gun attack, his facial features, and something particularly distinctive. He had missing fingers on his left hand, a detail often associated with Yakuza members who've undergone yubitsume, a ritual finger amputation, as an apology or show of loyalty within organized crime groups. Now, the police stated that they believed that there was a personal dispute between Mitani and Ishikawa, but they didn't elaborate on what the dispute involved or how long it had been ongoing. Now, a week later, on January 22nd, police conducted a search connected to Mitani's organized crime ties, and he was actually described as an executive member of the Ikeda-gumi, a designated Yakuza group, and so officers searched the Ikeda-gumi office in Okayama City, hoping to find him or just gather information about his whereabouts, but he wasn't there. Now, by this point, the police had received about 160 tips from the public, but none of them actually led to Mitani's capture. He's been on the run for over a week now, and despite the nationwide alert, he's managed to stay hidden. Now, 3 weeks would actually pass, and by February 14th, the tips had increased to around 280, but Mitani was still at large. Now, the police continued issuing public warnings and appeals for information, because the longer he remained free, the more concern would build about where he might be and whether he's still out. And when they still didn't locate him 6 days after, on February 20th, police released a public information video designed to help citizens identify Mitani if they encounter him. Now, this video features his photo from the CCTV footage, details about his physical characteristics, including his height of 5'4", the missing fingers on his left hand, and illustrations showing possible disguises he might use, such as masks, glasses, or hats.
愛媛県警が公開したのは30秒の動画です。動画では殺人容疑で公開手配している岡山市の特定抗争指定暴力団池田組の幹部前谷雄一郎容疑者の特徴などを紹介しています。
And this video again spread across Japanese media as news outlets ran coverage of the manhunt. And thankfully, this actually helped, because 2 weeks after the video,
That stock footage, bro. The stock footage is hilarious. His reaction.
release, on March 5th at around 6 a.m, investigators finally located Mitani. He was at a private residence in Okayama Prefecture. And once they confirmed his location, officers moved in and took him into custody on suspicion of murder, ending the nearly 2-month manhunt.
前谷容疑者の乗せた車が入ってきました。
And when the police questioned him, Mitani refused to answer any questions about the gun attack, about his whereabouts during the manhunt, or about why he actually killed Ishikawa. However, during the search of the residence where Mitani was found, officers discovered a firearm and live ammunition, which they believe may have been used in the Starbucks killing. And so 3 weeks later, on March 26, prosecutors indicted Mitani for murder at the Matsuyama District Court. And a week after that, on April 3rd, police formally re-arrested Mitani on new charges. Now in Japan, each charge actually requires its own arrest warrant and detention cycle, so even though Mitani never left the cell, the legal process actually required a fresh arrest to pursue the firearm violation separately. This time it was for violating Japan's firearm and sword possession control law, which prohibits virtually all civilian gun ownerships. Also in Japan, even
only in Japan they have sword prevention law.
A single unlicensed firearm is a pretty serious criminal offense, carrying up to 10 years in prison. But the longer the case went, the more it expanded beyond just Mitani. On May 8th, the police arrested a 59-year-old construction worker named Ryuji Doi for harboring Mitani during the manhunt. It turns out that Mitani had contacted him personally, telling him that he'd know where to go, and Ryuji agreed to help him. He hid him for over a month, and so on July 19th, Ryuji was sentenced to 18 months in prison. But the judge actually suspended the sentence for 3 years, which meant that Ryuji walked free on the condition that he stayed out of trouble. And so even if he commits one more offense within those 3 years, he would go straight to prison to serve every day of his sentence. Now, as of the most recent updates, Mitani actually remains in custody awaiting trial, and no sentencing date had been publicly confirmed yet. And the Starbucks we're talking about actually reopened after the gun attack. But the incidents of course left a mark on the community. But while this gun attack involved organized crime and a manhunt that stretched across the entire country, the next case is even worse.
Deadly gunfire erupts in broad daylight at a busy Quebec strip mall.
Yo, Thai Express. I know Thai Express. Love all Starbucks. Organized crime hit? Oh god.
On October 1st, 2025, at 10:30 am, 2 men walked into a Starbucks in Laval, Quebec during the morning rush, but they weren't actually there for coffee. Surveillance footage showed them moving directly toward a specific table where 3 men were sitting. They knew exactly who they were targeting, and seconds after, they opened fire.
2 individus qui font éruption se dirigent vers le fond de la salle et ouvrent le feu faisant...
One of the men sitting at the table was Charalambos Bobby the Greek Theologu, a well-known gang member in the city, and he was already hit multiple times, and his 2 companions, believed to be members of his gang, were also shot. Now within seconds, the shooters turned and ran out of the Starbucks. They disappeared into the plaza, leaving only chaos behind.
Several shots are fired. The 2 men then turn and run out.
Now at 10:35 am, just 5 minutes after the gun attack, Laval police received multiple 911 calls, and they dispatched their officers immediately. And when they arrived, they found 1 man dead, 2 others wounded, and a Starbucks full of traumatized witnesses. Now the police set up a large security perimeter around the entire plaza and told the public to avoid the area completely. And to get to the root of the matter, forensic teams moved in to process the scene and interview everyone who was inside. Now shortly after the shooting, Quebec's public security minister, Ian Lafreniere, released a statement revealing that the information available led him to believe that the incident was linked to organized crime, and that he doesn't believe that there were innocent victims among those people shot. Now the next morning, on October 2nd at 3 am, the police received a 911 call reporting a vehicle on fire in a parking lot on Joliot-Curie Street, near Clement Adair Avenue, in Montreal's Rivière-des-Prairies, Pointe-aux-Trembles neighborhood. And upon learning about the blaze,
I would have never been able to pronounce that. W Yapmaster, you got it.
firefighters quickly arrived at the scene to, of course, extinguish it. And this is where they immediately noticed signs of accelerant, a substance used to aid the spread of fire. And so they notified the police, who passed the case to arson investigators. And later that day, the police stated that the burnt vehicle could be actually linked to the Laval Starbucks gun attack, though they publicly didn't confirm who owned the vehicle or how exactly it was connected. But the implication was clear. The shooters likely used the vehicle to flee, then torched it to destroy the evidence. Now the same day, the surveillance video from the Starbucks was released publicly, and it shows the 2 suspects entering the area, moving directly toward the victim, and then running out as customers and staff take over. And on October 3rd, Quebec's coroner office confirmed the identity of the man who died, as again mentioned, the widely known gangster known as Bobby the Greek. He was somebody who actually had a criminal history which included drug trafficking, weapons possession, and conspiracy. He'd already served 4 years in prison for conspiracy and aggravated assault in 2007, and was even sentenced to 5 years in prison in 2010 for drug trafficking. Now one of the wounded men were also identified as 45-year-old Elias Hodges, who was allegedly known to be Bobby's right-hand man. But as for the other wounded man's name, it was never actually publicly confirmed. But he of course was most likely also connected to Bobby and his criminal operations.
Now, the person who appears to have been the main target was shot and killed, a man in his 40s known on the streets as Bobby the Greek. 2 men with him were injured in the attack. They're believed to have been acting as bodyguards.
But even after 4 months of intense search, the perpetrators of the attacks still haven't been identified. And while these gun attacks happened quickly and the shooters fled immediately, the next case involves a man who died on his birthday over a laptop.
We begin with this.
What the hell? On his birthday over a laptop?
Developing story out of Montclair, where a laptop theft has turned into a much bigger crime.
It's December 31st, 2019 at 11:37 a.m. A young man named Shuo Zheng is working on his laptop at a Starbucks in Oakland's Montclair district, located on the 2000 block of Mountain Boulevard. It's his 34th birthday, and he's planning to celebrate with friends that evening and ring in the new year. Now, Shuo is an engineer and research scientist at Aspra, an IBM company based in Emeryville, and he often comes—
Damn, bro, this guy ballin', big money making, man. About to celebrate his birthday.
to the Starbucks to work. But outside the building, a car is slowly circling the block. Inside is 22-year-old Byron O.J. Reed Jr. behind the wheel, while 18-year-old Kedron Wiggins is in the passenger seat, and 21-year-old Javon Lee is keeping his eyes fixed on the entrance, serving as a lookout. Kedron stepped out, walked straight into the Starbucks, and snatched a laptop from Shu's table before he could actually react and bolted back to the car. Now, Shu jumped up immediately and chased after, and he wasn't thinking about any danger. Instead, he simply ran out of the Starbucks and saw Kedron getting into the getaway car. Now, Byron started driving, trying to pull away before Shu could catch up. But Shu was way faster than expected, and he reached the car and grabbed onto the door handle, clinging to the vehicle as Byron accelerated.
Yo, this guy going hyper speed, man. And the adrenaline kicked in right away.
Now, despite that, Byron didn't stop. Instead, he kept driving, speeding up even, trying to shake Shu off. But Shu just held on, his body half on the car, half dragging along the pavement, all while he kept screaming at them to stop, desperate to get his laptop back. Now, as the car sped up, Kedron kicked Shu off the vehicle, and in an instant, Shu hit the ground, and Byron drove right over, before crashing into a parked vehicle on the side of the road. Now, the impact was brutal, but Byron wasn't done. As Shu lay on the ground, Byron actually ran him over again with the getaway car and crushed him with the car before speeding away. Now, witnesses who saw the thing unfold immediately called 911, and within minutes, paramedics arrived to transport Shu to the hospital. But his injuries were absolutely catastrophic, and he was barely clinging on to life. And sadly, later that evening, Shu died from his injuries at the hospital. Now, the police responded to the scene and began reviewing surveillance footage from the Montclair Village Association camera network, and the footage they were able to get their hands on showed the getaway car circling before the theft, the laptop snatch inside the Starbucks, and the chase outside that ended with Shu being run over. Now, investigators immediately identified the vehicle, and it didn't take long for them to trace it back to a home in the 9400 block of MacArthur Boulevard in Oakland. And so at around 4 p.m., just hours after the incident, the police arrested 2 suspects at an address described as Byron's sister's residence. And so Byron O.J. Reed Jr. was charged with murder and second-degree robbery, while Javon Lee was charged with involuntary manslaughter and second-degree robbery as well. Now, this news actually hit the Montclair community hard, because Shu wasn't just a random victim. He was a regular at that Starbucks. People knew him to be quiet and always focused working on his laptop, and now he was dead because 3 men wanted to steal it. And so on January 5th, 2020, a vigil was held at the Montclair Starbucks as friends, co-workers, and community members gathered to remember Shu. Now on January 31st, 2020, exactly 1 month after the theft, the police arrested the 3rd suspect, which was Kedron Wiggins, who was actually the person who grabbed the laptop inside the Starbucks. And so 2 days later, on February 3rd, 2020, prosecutors filed charges against Kedron as well. And on January 7th, 2022, Kedron was then sentenced to 12 years in prison, and Javon was sentenced to 10 years. But Byron's sentencing actually took longer, because his case kept moving through the courts for years because it involved additional factors, such as murder committed during a robbery. But finally, on June 25th, 2025, more than 5 years after Shu's death, Byron was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. But while this case ended with a man who made one split-second decision that cost him everything, the final case started with 3 employees dead over a safe that was never actually opened.
Was this a hate crime, a robbery gone wrong, or an act of cold-blooded vengeance against one of the victims?
97? Wow, we had freaking recent within 5 years. 5 to 10 years, and now we're going all the way back to 97?
It's July 6, 1997, and Georgetown is absolutely packed. Tourists are everywhere celebrating the 4th of July weekend in Washington, D.C. The streets are loud with excitement and restaurants are filled. And the Starbucks at Wisconsin Avenue is about to close for the night after a busy shift. Now 3 employees are inside, cleaning up and getting ready to go home. None of them knowing that within the next hour, they would be dead. One of them is Mary Catherine Mahoney, known as Katie, a 25-year-old night manager at the Georgetown Starbucks who started as a barista and worked her way up to being trusted with the keys and the safe. She was looking course, was celebrating her birthday 16 days later, after attending her brother's wedding that summer. And that night, she was closing the store with 2 other co-workers. Emery Ellen Evans, also 25, had been at the store for months, knew the routine well, and joked around with Katie during cleanup. They've pretty much become friends over the shifts they've worked together. And then there was Aaron David Goodrich. He just turned 18, fresh out of college, and he picked up this job trying to make some money over the summer before heading off to college in the fall. He had his whole life ahead of him. Now at 8 p.m. the doors were locked, and the 3 employees remained inside to complete their usual closing duties, cleaning and restocking for the morning crew, for example. And it seemed like an ordinary night. Now the next day around 5:15 a.m, day shift supervisor arrives to open the store, and to her surprise, she sees Katie's car outside, and the lights and music are still on. Now the pastries are neatly set out for the morning rush, yet the store doesn't look properly closed or even clean. And so she thinks, of course, that Katie's still around, and so she walks towards the back room to see what is going on. And that was when she found them. All 3 employees were lying on the floor in the back of the room, fatally shot, with Katie still clutching her keys as if she tried to escape. And so the supervisor ran outside and flagged down a passing bus, and the driver immediately called the police after hearing what had happened. Now by dawn, the Metropolitan Police Department sealed off the scene, while detectives began processing what will become one of the most infamous murder cases in Washington, D.C. history. Now the crime scene didn't make immediate sense. Investigators found a shoe print near the front door that didn't match any of the victim or their day managers. Ballistics testing showed that 2 different guns were used during the attack, a semi-automatic and a revolver, which at first led detectives to consider the possibility of more than one shooter. There was also a bullet hole in the ceiling near the safe, appearing to be a warning shot meant to intimidate. But here's what didn't actually make any sense. The cash drawers were completely untouched, and there was no sign that the safe had ever been opened. If this was supposed to be a robbery, why was nothing taken? And so the detectives considered the possibility of this being an armed robbery gone wrong, or a hate crime against one of the employees. And so they investigated a recently fired Starbucks employee who had inside knowledge of store operations and closing procedures, but he was actually cleared after questioning. Now there were no security cameras inside the store, and no alarms were ever triggered during the attack. And so Starbucks—
Damn, well, this was 97, bro. They didn't have that yet. You know, security camera in your store in 97?
corporate headquarters, along with local businesses, decided
it probably would have been like the worst quality ever.
To offer a reward for information, and this amount rose rapidly, eventually reaching $100,000, making it one of the largest rewards in DC history at the time. But despite the intense media coverage and hundreds of tips from the public, no solid lead emerged, and the case eventually went cold. Then on September 27th, 1997, a couple of months later, homicide detectives received an anonymous phone call, and the caller described a man named Carl. He had a thin build, and he was in his mid-20s, living in Gallatin Street in Northeast DC with his mother, his wife, and a young child, and driving a blue car. He was supposed to be the man behind all of this. Now investigators began cross-checking records and identified this person as Carl Derek Cooper, and his criminal record was actually pretty long and serious, including armed robberies, firearm offenses, auto theft, and drug charges. He appeared to fit the profile, but there wasn't actually enough evidence to—
Yeah, I was about to say, like, how the hell did this anonymous person drop a nuke like this to them with no evidence?
Arrest him for the murders. Instead, they simply placed him under surveillance, monitoring his home and tracing his phone calls, and just slowly building up a case. And over the next year and a half, they did actually link Carl to a growing pattern of armed commercial robberies across DC and Maryland. And informants told them that he routinely carried 2 guns when he committed his crimes. He also ran a robbery ring, and witnesses reported that he used intimidation shots during robberies, firing into walls or ceilings to scare the victims into compliance, just like the shots fired in the Starbucks ceiling. But still, they couldn't arrest him. But on March 1st, 1999, nearly 2 years after the murders, Carl Derek Cooper was finally arrested, but it wasn't for the Starbucks. He was arrested for an attempted robbery and attack of an off-duty police officer named Bruce Howard that happened back in 1996 in Prince George's County, Maryland. Now Bruce survived the attack, but that case actually gave investigators the legal leverage they desperately needed to bring Carl into custody. And the moment that Carl was behind bars, the real interrogation began. And so on March 2nd through March 4th, 1999, Carl went through a 54-hour interrogation involving detectives from MPD, the FBI, and Prince George's County.
Damn! Yo, they went crazy.
Police. Now he was given his Miranda rights repeatedly, and he also signed multiple waivers acknowledging that he actually understood those rights. Now they administered a voice stress test with the results showing clear deception when he denied any involvement in the Starbucks murders. And the story that he told them actually changed consistently, shifting every time detectives poked holes in his alibi. Now first, Carl pointed fingers at Keith Covington, his childhood friend. He claimed that it was an inside job and that Keith planned and executed it alone, but there wasn't any confirmed evidence of any close relationship between Keith and Emery Allen Evans. But despite that, detectives brought Keith in for questioning, and he admitted that he was familiar with Emery, but he denied any involvement in the murders. He also provided a solid account of where he was at the time and passed every test they gave him, ultimately clearing himself. But Carl didn't stop there. He changed his story yet again. This time he admitted that he was inside the Starbucks that night, but he insisted that Keith was the one who actually fired the shots. But the detectives confronted him with the inconsistency, laying out the evidence in front of him, such as the ballistics reports, the robbery patterns, the witness statements, and the timeline, all showing that his story didn't actually add up. And finally, after 54 hours, Carl's story finally collapsed. He admitted the truth. He said that he was outside the Starbucks on the morning of July 6th, sitting outside and watching the employees through the window, and then waited until after closing when the store would be nearly empty. He entered alone, carried the 2 guns in his waistband, and demanded access to the safe, believing that it held thousands of dollars from the busy holiday weekend. But Katie actually refused to hand over the keys, so he fired a shot into the ceiling to frighten her into cooperating. But it didn't actually work, and so he decided to shoot all 3 employees. Katie was shot 5 times while still holding the keys when she fell, and apparently trying to unlock a door and escape. Aaron was shot once, the bullet passing through his lungs and heart, and Emery was on the ground and shot execution style while kneeling. Then Carl decided to flee the scene without actually taking any money from the registers, leaving only 3 victims in the back room. He then later said that he went home, changed his clothes, and washed them to remove the blood and residue, and then buried both firearms in a plastic bag near St. Anne's infant home. Now the guns were never recovered despite the extensive searches of the area, and so on March 5th, 1999, Carl Derek Cooper was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree felony murder, and on August 5th, 1999, he was indicted on 48 separate federal charges, including the Starbucks murders, the Bruce Howard gun attack, and multiple other armed robberies and firearm violations spanning from 1993 all the way to 1998. Now Carl actually later attempted to revoke his confession, claiming that the interrogation coerced him into saying this stuff.
I swear on my father's grave and my son's life, I didn't do Starbucks.
But on April 25th, 2000, facing the possibility of the death penalty under the federal charges, Carl actually pleaded guilty and formally accepted sole responsibility for the Starbucks murders. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. And now in January of 2002, the case was featured on the FBI Files television series in an episode titled The Coffee Shop Murders, bringing the story to a national audience. And in July of 2022, on the 25th anniversary of the murders, Starbucks actually had a memorial ceremony for Katie Mahoney, Emery Allen Evans, and Aaron David Goodrich at the Georgetown location. Now Carl Derek Cooper remains in federal prison today, where he will spend the rest of his life. Now somewhere near St. Anne's infant home, the 2 guns, and Carl Derek Cooper knows exactly where, but he hasn't disclosed the location yet, and probably never will.
What is this guy, friggin' Goldie Roger hiding the One Piece? Bro, you're done. Your life is over. Just say where you put the guns. Like, what? This guy's trying to think there's like a sliver of hope to get out of jail because they don't have the evidence of the gun. Man, get your ass in jail, bro. You're in jail. Just give it up. That was a crazy video, not gonna lie. Yapmaster once again. Love your videos. Like, yo, this guy's speaking facts, bro. This guy, the first guy in the video, was like, oh, I didn't process it until the next morning. Like, bro, it's like terrible human beings. Starbucks is a dangerous place, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I learned. That's why I go to Tim Hortons. If you're Canadian. Anyways, that was a crazy video, not gonna lie. It honestly did get worse as the video progressed. Sick individuals, crazy individuals, insane individuals that should have just been locked up the second they did something bad. W video, Yapmaster always cooks. Well-researched video. If you guys like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Yapmaster and like his video and watch his videos. Always puts out very informative videos about disturbing stuff in communities. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Hopefully this time we're gonna do gameplay. I got some indie horror games I want to play, so we're gonna do some gameplay videos soon. Maybe some live streams, I don't know. Anyways, I'll see y'all in the next video. Have yourself a good day and peace.